Chapter 003 The Bitter Truth. If someone had asked Zorian at the end of the first week what classes he thought he would have the most trouble with, he would have answered spell formulas and advanced mathematics. Combat magic maybe. 2 weeks later, he could safely say the answer was warding. Warding, the art of protecting things with magic, was a surprisingly complex field. You have to take into account what the thing you're trying to protect is made of, what its dimensions and geometry were, how the ward is going to react with the already existing magic. Or you could just slap a general-purpose warding invocation on your target and hope for the best. But the professor would fail you for that answer, so that wasn't an option in the classroom. But these complexities aside, the class should have been a breeze, or at least not this confusing. Zorian was a patient, methodical person when it came to magecraft, and had slogged through worse offenders than warding with decent results. The problem was that their teacher, a stern woman with hair cut so short she might as well have gone all the way and shaved her head completely, didn't know how to teach. At all. Oh, she clearly knew the subject matter very well, but she simply didn't know how to translate that knowledge into a proper lecture. She was leaving a lot of things out of her lectures, apparently not realizing that just because they were obvious to her, they were not obvious to her students. The textbook she assigned for the class wasn't much better, and read more like a manual for a professional warder than a student's textbook. Question 6. You're tasked with building a research outpost on a first-degree MotherOfL in the Sarakian Highlands. The building is meant to support a staff of 4 at any particular time, and the prospectors have expressed concerns over heavy presence of winter wolf packs and an infestation of bar wasps in the surrounding area. You have a budget of 25,000 pieces and are assumed to be a certified second circle warder. Assuming only mana extracted from MotherOfL is available for powering the wards, which combination of wards do you feel would be the best choice for the outpost? Explain your reasoning. Draw basic floor plans of the planned outpost and explain how the planned room placement and shape of the building itself affect ward effectiveness. Do you think the issue of the bar wasp infestation is best resolved by using a vermin-repellent ward or by careful choice of building materials? Explain your reasoning. Assume that you are commissioned to build not 1 but 5 outposts. The budget remains the same. How does this change your answer? Do you believe it is better to make the wards identical for all 5 outposts, or do you feel some amount of difference between them is in order? Explain the advantages and disadvantages of each approach. Zorian rubbed his eyes in frustration. How was he supposed to answer a question like this? He didn't take the architecture elective, and wasn't aware that you had to take it to do well in your warding class. Not to mention that the question assumed they knew what the market rates were for buying the necessary materials, or that they knew where the Sarakian Highlands were. Zorian was quite good at geography, and he had no idea, though considering the presence of monsters like winter wolves, he suspected they were somewhere in the northern forest. At the very least he knew how to answer the third part of the question. The correct answer was definitely wards. Even if the outpost was made inedible to borer wasp larvae, it would still make a prime place to build a nest. Considering how territorial those insects were, you didn't want them living anywhere near you. Theoretically, the careful choice of materials options would free up mana that would otherwise be spent on maintaining vermin-repellent wards, but those wards required very little mana flow to stay active. Especially if they were keyed specifically to borer wasps. His thoughts were interrupted by a girlish giggle coming from the back of the classroom. Zorian didn't even have to turn around to know what was happening. Zack was entertaining the students around him again. He wished the teacher would penalize the guy for the disruption he was causing, especially in the middle of an exam, but Zack was a bit of a darling to the stern woman because he was the only student passing her exams. No doubt the guy had already finished his test with 100% accuracy. Which, by the way, made no sense whatsoever. During their first 2 years, Zack was a below-average student more distinguished because of his charm than magical talent. Kind of like a nicer version of Furtoof, actually. This year, though, he was assing everything. Everything. He had a wealth of knowledge and a work ethic he hadn't had at the end of their second year, far in excess of what could be gained through the normal passage of time. How does one get so much better in the span of a single summer? 15 minutes later he threw his pencil down on the table, calling it quits. He only filled in 8 out of 10 questions, and he wasn't sure how correct these 8 were, but it would have to do. He would have to set aside a couple of days for rewarding self-study, because the lectures were making less and less sense with every passing day. The only other student that stayed in the classroom as long as he did was Akoya, and she handed in her paper only a few seconds after he did and followed him outside. Of course, they stayed in the classroom so long for very different reasons. He stayed so he could scrape in a few stray points. She stayed because she was a perfectionist who wanted to triple-check everything to make sure she didn't forget anything. Zorian, wait. Zorian slowed down and allowed Akoya to catch up to him. The girl could be insufferable sometimes, but she was a good person overall and he didn't want to snap at her just because the test didn't go the way he wanted. How do you think you did back there? She asked. Badly, he answered, not seeing the point in lying. Yeah, me too. Zorian rolled his eyes. His and her definition of badly differed greatly. Neela finished in only half an hour, said Akoya after a brief silence. I bet she'll get a perfect score again. Ako. Zorian sighed. I know everyone thinks I'm jealous but that's not normal, said Akoya in a hushed but agitated voice. I'm pretty smart and I study all the time and I'm still having problems with the curriculum. And we've both been in the same class as Nilu for the past 2 years and she was never this good. And now she's beating me in every single class. Kind of like Zack, said Zorian. Exactly like Zack. She agreed. They even hang out together, 2 of them and one other girl I don't know, behaving like they're in their own private little world. Or like they're a couple, said Zorian, before frowning. Triple? What's the word for a romantic relationship between 3 people? Akoya scoffed. Whatever. The point is the 3 of them do nothing but waste time together and antagonize the teachers and get perfect scores anyway. They even refuse the chance to get transferred to first-tier groups. Can you believe that? You're too worked up over this, Zorian warned. Aren't you a little bit curious how they do it? Asked Akoya. Of course I am, scoffed Zorian. It's hard not to be. But what can I do about it? Besides, Zack has never done anything to me. I don't want to cause problems for him just because he has suddenly discovered his inner prodigy. Zorian felt Benisek joined them suddenly, simply popping up from behind a corner so he could walk beside them. Sometimes Zorian wondered if the chubby boy could smell gossip. I know what you mean, Benisek said. I always thought Zack was no good at anything. You know, like me? Ha! Well, there's no way he got this good at everything over one summer break, Zorian said. I guess he was pulling the wool over our eyes all this time. Man, that's so stupid, said Benisek. If I were that good I'd make sure everyone knew it. I don't think he was faking lack of skill for 2 years straight, Akoya huffed. He would have slipped at least occasionally. Well, what's left then? Zorian asked. He refrained from listing some of the more obscure ways such a rapid growth could be accomplished with magic, because most of them were criminal and he was sure the Academy checked Zack to make sure he wasn't a shape-shifting imposter or possessed by the ghost of a long-dead mage. Maybe he knows the answers in advance, she suggested. Only if he is an oracle, Benisek said. Boole gave him an oral exam last Tuesday when you went home early, and he was rattling off answers like he swallowed the textbook. The conversation died down as all 3 filed into the alchemy classroom, which was really more of a big alchemy workshop than a typical classroom. There were about 20 tables, each one full of various containers and other equipment. All ingredients for the day's lesson were already set out in front of them, though some would require additional preparation before they could be used in whatever process they were learning about that day. He was pretty sure they weren't going to be putting live cave crickets into the boiling solution, for instance. Alchemy, like warding, was a complicated art, but their alchemy teacher knew her stuff and knew how to teach, so Zorian wasn't having any issues with the class. Technically they had to work in groups of 2 or 3 students because there were not enough tables and equipment, but Zorian always paired up with Benisek, which translated to working alone in practice. The only problem was getting Benisek to shut up and stop distracting him during class. "Hey Zorian," Benisek whispered to him not so quietly. "I never noticed it until now, but our teacher is kind of hot." Zorian gritted his teeth. The blasted idiot couldn't keep his voice down if his life was on the line. There was no way she didn't hear that. "Benisek," he whispered back to his partner. "I need good grades in alchemy to get my dream job when I graduate. If you screw this up for me I will never speak to you again." Benisek grumbled mutinously before returning to his ogling. Zorian refocused on grinding the border wasp husks into a fine powder needed for the particular type of glue they were supposed to be making. Admittedly, Aslan Marivowski did look surprisingly good for a 50-year-old woman. Some kind of cosmetic treatment probably, she was their alchemy teacher, after all. Maybe even a true youth potion, though those were really rare and usually imperfect in some way. "I don't see why you like this class so much," grumbled Benisek. "I'm not even sure I'd call it magical. You don't need mana for it. It's all searching for herbs this, cutting the roots the right way that. It's like cooking. Hell, we're making glue, of all things. You should leave that to girls." "Benisek. It's true," he protested. "Even our teacher is a girl. A hot girl, but still. I read somewhere that alchemy traces its roots back to witches' covens, with their potions and whatnot. Even now the best alchemical families are descended from witches. I bet you didn't know that, huh?" As a matter of fact, he did know that. He was, after all, tutored in alchemy by an honest-to-God's traditional witch before he went to the academy. She was so traditional, in fact, that she scoffed at the name alchemy and referred to her skill strictly as potion-making. But that wasn't the sort of stuff you wanted people to know, for a wide variety of reasons. "If you don't shut up right now I won't let you partner with me anymore," Zorian told him seriously. "Hey!" protested Benisek. "Who's going to help me with that stuff, then? I'm not good at this." "I don't know," said Zorian innocently. "Maybe you should find some girl to help you." Fortunately, the teacher was currently too busy fawning over Zack's newest masterpiece to pay attention to Zorian's table. Somehow the boy managed to make some kind of enhancement potion out of the provided ingredients, and that was apparently very impressive. Aslan didn't appear to mind that Zack completely ignored the assignment to make magical glue and did his own thing. Zorian shook his head and tried to concentrate on his own work. He wondered whether he would have gotten the same reaction if he did something like that, or if he would be accused of showing off. The few times Zorian tried to wow the teachers he was simply told to work on his basics and not to get cocky, because arrogance kills. Was it because Zack was the heir of noble House Nevada? Or something else? It was in moments like these that he understood exactly how Akoya felt about all this. "Break, and that concludes today's lesson," said Ilse. "Before you leave, however, I have an announcement to make. As some of you know, the Academy traditionally organizes a dance on the eve of the summer festival. This year is no exception. The dance will take place in the entrance hall next Saturday. For those of you who are unaware, attendance is mandatory this year." Zorian groaned, slamming his forehead into the table in front of him, causing the rest of the class to snicker. Ilse pointedly ignored his reaction. "For those of you who don't know how to dance, dance lessons will be held every day at 8 in the evening in room 6. Those of you who do know how to dance still have to come to at least one of these lessons to prove so. I will not have you embarrass me on the night of the dance. Dismissed." "Miss Strohs, Mr. Kaczynski, stay after class please." "Oh great," Zorian mumbled. He probably should have restrained himself from reacting so strongly to the pronouncement. Truthfully, he intended to skip the dance, regardless of how mandatory it was. Did Ilse realize that? No, he could detect no disapproval in posture, and he was pretty sure she'd be rather annoyed if she sensed his plans. "Now then." Ilse began when he and Akoya were the only students left. "I assume you both know how to dance?" "Sure," said Zorian. Akoya fidgeted. "I'm not very good at it." "No matter," Ilse said. We'll iron out any gaps you may have easily enough. The reason I told you to stay behind is that I want you to help me with the dance lessons." Zorian considered refusing outright. It wasn't something he wanted to spend his time on, but he figured this could be a favor that would make Elsa forgive him a transgression or two. Like, say, not showing up to the mandatory dance? Before he could express his tentative agreement, however, Akoya decided in his place. "How can we help?" she said, clearly pleased they were chosen for this honor. Zorian raised an eyebrow at the way she presumed to speak for him, but let it slide for the moment. "We only have 5 days to teach everyone how to dance," Elsa said. "That's why we're going to use magic to help." "Animation spells," Zorian guessed. "Yes," Elsa said, then quickly moved to explain for Akoya's benefit. "There is a spell that will guide a person's limbs and body through whatever dance it is designed for. It's not really suitable as a substitute for dancing skill, but if you practice dancing while you're under its effects, you will learn a lot faster than you would otherwise." "How does that work?" Akoya asked curiously. "The spell moves you around like a puppet on a string until you learn how to move along with it, if only to make the feeling of something jerking you around go away," said Zorian. "Eventually you no longer need the spell to dance correctly." "I see you have personal experience with this method," Elsa said with a smile. Zorian resisted the urge to scowl. Getting put under that spell by Damon was one of his childhood traumas. It wasn't amusing at all. "I sincerely hope you intend to give students a choice to refuse," Zorian said. "Of course," Elsa agreed. "Though, those who refuse this method will have to attend at least 3 sessions instead of 1, so I expect most will choose this option instead of the traditional one. In any case, I want you two to help me cast the spell on people during the lessons. I expect I'll have to dispel and recast the spell often, and I could use some help." "And why did you choose us, specifically?" Zorian asked. "You both have decent control over your magic and you seem responsible enough to be taught such a spell. Animation spells targeting people are restricted material, after all, and not something normally available to students." "Huh. So how did Damon get hold of it then? In his 2nd year, no less? Well, whatever. At least knowing how to cast the spell will make it easier to counter it in the future." "Anything else?" Elsa asked. "Very well, then. Come to my office after the last class and I'll set up some dummies for you to practice on before moving on to people. Poorly controlled, the spell is intensely uncomfortable. We don't want to give anyone traumas." Zorian narrowed his eyes. He didn't. Not even Damon would. Oh, who is he kidding? Of course he would have. Practicing such a spell on your own little brother was right up Damon's alley. "Miss Rose, you can leave. I have something else to discuss with Mr. Kaczynski." Elsa began to speak the moment Akoya was gone, catching Zorian somewhat by surprise. He shook his head to clear his thoughts, trying to ignore his annoyance with Damon in favor of paying attention to what Elsa was saying. "So Zorian," she said with a faint smile. "How are you getting along with your mentor?" "He's having me work on my basic 3, Zorian told her flatly. "We're still on the levitation exercise." Yes, even after 4 weeks, Xveen was still making him levitate a pencil over and over again. Start over. Start over. Start over. The only thing Zorian learned in those sessions was how to dodge marbles that Xveen kept throwing at him. The jerk seemed to have an endless supply of those things. Yes, Professor Xveen likes his students to have a firm grasp of the basics before moving on to advanced topics, Elsa agreed. That or he hates his students. Zorian personally thought his theory was a lot more plausible. "Well, I just wanted to tell you that you might be able to change mentors soon," Elsa said. "One of my students will be dropping out after the summer festival, and I'll have a vacancy to fill. Unless something comes up, you're almost certain to be the one I pick. That is, if you're actually interested in the transfer." "Of course I'm interested," Zorian half shouted, much to Elsa's amusement. He frowned for a moment. "Unless you also plan to throw marbles at me? Is that some kind of standard training method?" "No," Elsa chuckled. "Xveen is special that way." "Well, I just wanted to see how you feel about this before doing anything. Have a nice day." It was only after he was out of the classroom that he realized this development greatly complicated his plan to skip out on the dance. He couldn't afford to annoy his potential new mentor too much, else he'd be stuck with Xveen for the rest of his education. "Well played, Professor." "Well played." "Break. Why can't we just cast that spell ourselves once the dancing starts?" Zorian let out a long-suffering sigh. "You can't make an animation spell do something you don't know how to do yourself. You don't know how to dance, hence you cannot animate anyone to dance either. Also, how are you going to break the spell once the dance ends if you can't move your arms where you want them to be? This really isn't the sort of spell you should be casting on yourself." Really, there were so many problems with that idea that Zorian struggled to put them all into words. Are these people thinking about the questions they're asking at all? "So how many dances do we have to learn?" 10, said Zorian, bracing himself for the cries of outrage. Sure enough, a rumble of complaints erupted after that statement. Thankfully, Ilse took over the lesson at this point, instructing everyone to pair up and scatter throughout the spacious room to give everyone enough space. Zorian could already feel a headache coming and cursed himself from letting Ilse talk him into this. Even though room 6 was fairly spacious, there were a lot of people and the invisible pressure they gave off was particularly strong today. "You all right?" Benisek asked, putting his hand on Zorian's shoulder. "I'm fine," Zorian said, waving his hand off. He didn't like to be touched much. "I just have a slight headache." "Did you need help with something?" "Nah. You just looked like you could use some company, standing all alone in your little corner," Benisek said. Zorian decided not to tell him that he was intentionally standing on the sidelines unless he was needed. Benisek wasn't the sort of person who understood the need for some breathing room. "Say, who is your date for the dance anyway?" Zorian suppressed a groan. Of course Benisek would want to talk about that. Relationships weren't something Zorian thought about often. The chances that one of his classmates would agree to date him were minuscule. For one, such a relationship would quickly be noticed by the rest of their classmates, and the resulting merciless teasing was something few relationships could survive for any appreciable length. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly, all teenage girls liked older guys. Dating a guy that was 2 or 3 years her senior seemed to be a status symbol for a girl, and a majority of them loudly disparaged the male population their own age as crass and immature. When they were in their first year, all the girls wanted to date third years. Now that they were in their third year, all the girls wanted to date apprentice graduates. Since there were plenty of guys willing to play along, the chances that some girl in his class would give him the time of day was negligible. And the girls that weren't his classmates. To most of them he wasn't Zorian Kaczynski, but that guy who was a brother of Damon and Fertov Kaczynski. They had this image of what he ought to be like, and once it became obvious that the real him didn't match their expectations, they inevitably became upset. Besides, all this romantic stuff. Well, Benisek prodded. "I'm not going," Zorian said. "What do you mean I'm not going?" Benisek said cautiously. "Just what I said," Zorian said. "I'm skipping out on the whole dance thing. Turns out I had an alchemy-related accident and had to stay in my room for the evening." It was perhaps a bit cliché, but whatever. Zorian had already found a particularly tricky potion that was supposed to make a person more outgoing and sociable, something that was entirely plausible for him to try to make, that would make a person very ill when done wrong but wouldn't actually kill him. If he does it right it will seem like an honest mistake instead of a way to weasel out of the dance. "Oh come on," protested Benisek, and Zorian had to pinch him to make him lower his voice. The last he needed was to have Ilse overhear him. "It's the summer festival. A special summer festival, with the whole parallel thingy. Planar alignment," Zorian offered. "Whatever. The point is that you have to be there. Everyone who is anyone is coming." "I'm a nobody." Benisek sighed. "No, Zorian, you're not. Look, Zorian, we're both merchant kids, right?" "I don't like where this is going," Zorian warned. Benisek ignored him. "I know you don't like to hear this but, don't. Just don't. You have a duty to your family to put on a good face. Your behavior reflects on them, you know. There is nothing wrong with my behavior, snapped Zorian, aware that he was attracting stares of nearby people but not caring at the moment. You're free to go to whatever you want, but leave me out of it. I'm a nobody. A third son of a minor merchant family from the middle of nowhere. People here don't give a fuck about me. They don't even know who I am. And I like it that way. Okay, protested Benisek, gesturing wildly. Dude, you're making a scene. Whatever, scoffed Zorian. Leave me alone and go away. The nerve. If there was anyone who should take a look at the impression he was leaving to people, it should be Benisek. The irresponsible leech would have been dumped into a Tier 3 group if it wasn't for Zorian's constant help, and this is how he repays him. Why was he even hanging out with that guy? He scoffed, trying to calm down. Stupid summer festival and stupid dance. The funny thing is that unlike most people who hate these kinds of events, Zorian wasn't strictly bad at them. He knew how to dance, he knew how to eat without embarrassing himself, and he knew how to talk to people at these kinds of events. He had to know these things, because his parents used to drag him along with them when attending these kinds of events, and they made sure he knew how to behave himself properly once there. But he hated it. He had no words to describe how much events such as these sickened him. Why should he be forced to attend something he hates when the Academy had absolutely no right to demand it of him? No, they had no right at all. Break. Hesitantly, Zorian knocked on the door to Elsa's office, wondering why she called him here. There is no way. Come in. Zorian peeked inside and was promptly told to have a seat while Elsa calmly sat behind her desk, drinking something out of a cup. Probably tea. She looked calm and serene, but Zorian could detect an undercurrent of disapproval in her posture. So, Zorian, Elsa began. You've been doing quite well in my class. Thank you, Professor, said Zorian cautiously. I try. Indeed, one could say you're one of the best students in your group. A student I intend to take under my wing after this whole festival rush dies down. An example to everyone, and just as much a representative of your class as Miss Rose. Oh, this is bad. I don't so excited about the dance this Saturday? Asked Elsa, seemingly changing the topic. Yes I am, Zorian lied smoothly. It sounds like lots of fun. That's good, Elsa said happily. Because I heard that you plan to boycott the event. It was rather upsetting, I must say. I was rather clear that attendance is mandatory, I believe. Note to self, find something horrible to do to Benisek. A spell that causes the target's tongue to feel like it's on fire or something. Or maybe piercing pain in the genital region. Just a bunch of nasty rumors, Professor, Zorian said smoothly. I would never dream of intentionally boycotting the dance. If I am unable to attend, Zorian, Elsa cut him off. Professor, why is it so important that I show up there, anyway? Asked Zorian, a bit of crankiness seeping into his voice. He knew it was a bad idea to blow up on a teacher, but damn, this whole thing was pissing him off. I have a medical condition, you know? Crowds give me headaches. She snorted. They give me headaches too, if it makes you feel any better. I can give you a potion for that. The fact is I'm one of the organizers of the dance, and if too many students are absent I'll end up with a black mark on my record. Especially if someone as prominent as yourself were to not show up. Me? Prominent? I'm just an average student. Zorian protested. Not nearly as average as you think, Elsa said. Just getting this far requires extraordinary intelligence and dedication, especially for a civilian-born student like yourself, who wasn't exposed to magic your entire life. People keep an eye out for people like you. Also, you're Damon's younger brother, and we both know how famous he is. Zorian's lips stretched into a thin line. Zorian was sure the last reason was what it all came down to in the end, and all the other arguments were just excuses and attempts to butter him up. Even with his brother on a whole different continent, Zorian still couldn't escape from his shadow. You don't like to be compared to him, she guessed. No, Zorian admitted in a clipped tone. Why is that? she asked curiously. Zorian considered sidestepping the question. His family was a sore subject for him, but uncharacteristically decided to go for honesty. He knew it wouldn't do much, but he felt like venting at the moment. Everything I do is always compared to Damon and, to a slightly lesser extent, for Toph. It has been that way since I was a child, before Damon ever became famous. My parents have never been shy about playing favorites, and since they were always interested chiefly in social achievements, I was always found wanting. My family has no use for a withdrawn bookworm, and made that abundantly clear over the years. Until recently, they ignored me completely, treating me more like I was my sister's babysitter than their son. But something happened recently that caused them to take notice of you? Ilsa surmised. For Toph happened, Zorian growled out. He bombed several exams, had to be bailed out by father's connections. He has shown himself to be generally unreliable, which is a problem, because he was supposed to be the spare heir for the family business, just in case Damon dies on one of his escapades. So now I am suddenly taken out of the metaphorical closet so they can groom me for the role. But you don't want to be the spare? She guessed. I don't want to be involved in Kaczynski family politics, period. I am not a part of that family anyway. Never was. At best, I was only ever a loosely aligned associate. I appreciate them feeding me and funding my education, and I'm willing to reimburse them for that when I get a job, but they have no right to ask something like that of me. I won't hear it. I have my own life and my own plans, none of which involve playing second fiddle to my older brother and wasting time on insipid social events where people suck up to each other non-stop. He decided to stop there, because he was just making himself angrier. Plus, he suspected Ilsa didn't empathize with him much. Most people thought he was simply being overdramatic about his family. They weren't the ones who had to live with them. When she realized he wasn't going to say anything more, Ilsa leaned back and took a deep breath. I empathize with you, Zorian, but I'm afraid such comparisons are unavoidable. For what it's worth, I think you're shaping up to be a fine mage yourself. Not everyone can be a prodigy like Damon. Right, said Zorian, refusing to look at her. She sighed, running her hand through her hair. You make me feel like the villain here. Family issues aside, why are you so bothered by this? It's a party. I thought all teenagers liked parties. Are you concerned about finding a date? Just ask some first-years and they'll jump at the chance. They can't attend unless invited by an upperclassman, you know? Zorian released a sigh of his own. He wasn't looking for a way to find a date, he had no doubt that simply dropping his last name would net him some impressionable giggly first year for the evening. He was looking for a way out. Something that Ilsa wasn't willing to provide him with, it seemed. I'm not getting a date, Zorian told her, rising from his seat. I may have to come to the dance, but I'm pretty sure that bringing a date is not mandatory. Have a nice day. He was surprised that Ilsa didn't try to contradict him as he left. Maybe this whole dance thing won't be such a chore. Break. Zorian trudged through the corridors of his residence building wearily, not in any real hurry to get to his room. The teachers had refrained from giving them any substantial homework over the weekend, knowing that everyone would be too preoccupied with the summer festival to get any work done. Normally all that free time would be a godsend to Zorian, but just thinking about what he would have to endure tomorrow was enough to make Zorian lose the will to do anything fun or productive, so he fully intended to go to sleep the moment he arrived at his room. As he entered his residence building he noted that someone was already in a celebratory mood, because the walls of the corridor he was passing through were full of colorful splotches in vivid yellow, green, and red. Zorian. Just the man I was looking for. Zorian jerked in shock at the loud voice behind him and whirled around to face the man who invaded his personal space. He scowled at the grinning idiot in front of him. Why are you here, for Toph? He asked. What, I can't visit my little brother? He protested. You too good to hang out with Big Bro? Cut the crap, for Toph. You never come to me when you just want to hang out with someone. What do you need help with, now? That's totally not true, he huffed. You're my favorite brother, you know? Zorian stared at him impassively for a few seconds. Dayman isn't here, so you'll settle for me, huh? Dayman is an asshole, Furtov snapped. Ever since he got famous he's always too busy to help out his younger brother. I swear, that guy only thinks about himself. The hypocrisy is thick with this one, Zorian mumbled. Sorry, I didn't catch that, Furtov said. Nothing, Zorian waved dismissively. So what kind of trouble are you in now? I might have promised a friend I'll make her an anti-rash potion, Furtov said sheepishly. There is no such thing as an anti-rash potion, huffed Zorian. There is, however, an anti-rash salve, which is applied directly to the affected skin instead of being imbibed like a potion is. This just shows what a total dunderhead you are when it comes to alchemy. What the hell were you thinking, promising your friend something like that? I kind of pushed her into a purple creeper patch during our wilderness survival class, Furtov admitted. Please, you have to help me. I'll find you a girlfriend if you do. I don't want a girlfriend, snapped Zorian irritably. Least of all the kind of girlfriend Furtov would set him up with. Look, why are you bothering me about this? Just go to the apothecary and buy some. It's Friday evening. All stores are closed in preparation for the celebration tomorrow. Well, that's too bad, because I can't help you, said Zorian. First 2 years are all theory and lab safety, and I'm just starting my 3rd year. We haven't done any serious alchemy in class so far. So true and yet such a bald-faced lie. He hadn't done all that much alchemy in class, but he had done quite a bit of private study in his free time. He could make an antidote for the purple creeper rash easily, but why should he spend his expensive alchemical ingredients? Oh man, come on. You can speak 3 different languages and you know all the silly shaping exercises they make us learn, but you can't even do something so basic? What the hell are you doing in your room all day long if not learning how to do stuff like that? You're one to talk. Zorian snapped. You're a year older than me, you should be perfectly capable of doing this yourself. Eh? You know I never cared for alchemy. Too fiddly and boring for me, Furtov said with a dismissive wave. Besides, I can't even make vegetable soup without ruining Mom's kitchenware. Do you really want me around alchemical equipment? Well, when he put it that way. I'm tired, Zorian said. I'll make it tomorrow. Are you crazy? Tomorrow is too late. Oh come on, it's not like she'll die of a goddamn rash, said Zorian irritably. Please, Zorian, I know you don't care about these kind of things, but she's crushing on this boy and Zorian groaned and tuned him out. That's pretty much all he needed to know about this emergency. And if my friend's rash isn't fixed by then she won't be able to go and she'll never forgive me. Please, 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 stop it. Please, 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 I said stop it. I'll do it, okay? I'll make the damn salve, but you owe me big time for this, you hear? Yup, he said cheerfully. How much time do you need? Meet me at the fountain in about 3 hours, Zorian sighed. Zorian watched him as he ran away, probably so he wouldn't change his mind or make some concrete demands. He shook his head and went back to his room to retrieve the necessary alchemical reagents. The academy had an alchemical workshop students could use for their own projects, but you had to bring your own ingredients. Fortunately, he had everything he needed for this particular task. The workshop was totally empty aside from him, but that wasn't very unusual. Most people were preparing for the dance tomorrow and were unlikely to do some last-minute alchemy practice. Unfazed by the eerie silence of the workshop, Zorian scattered the reagents across the table and set to work. Ironically, the main ingredient of the anti-rash salve was the very plant that was the cause of this mess, the purple creeper, or more accurately its leaves. Zorian had already left them to dry in the sun, and now they only had to be ground to powder. This was generally the most annoying part of the procedure, as purple creeper leaves released a cloud of irritating dust into the air if they were simply crushed with a standard mortar and pestle set. The textbooks he read had all sorts of fancy ways to deal with this, usually involving expensive equipment, but Zorian had a much simpler solution. He wrapped the leaves in a slightly wet piece of cloth, then wrapped the whole thing in a piece of leather, and then hammered the resulting lump until he felt no resistance. The irritating dust would bond with the cloth and the leaf pieces wouldn't. After mixing the leaf dust with 10 drops of honey and a spoon of Oblia berry juice, he put the whole thing over a low fire, stirring the contents until they achieved uniform color and consistency. Then he removed the bowl from the fire and sat down while he waited for the stuff to cool. It was very impressive work, a rather feminine voice sounded behind him. Nice improvisation with the creeper leaves. I'll have to remember that trick. Zorian recognized the owner of the voice though, and Kale wasn't really female, despite some nasty rumors. He turned around to face the Morlock boy, studying his bone-white hair and intense blue eyes for a moment before returning his attention to cleaning the alchemical equipment he had used. No reason to get Bart from using the workshop because he failed to clean up after himself. He struggled to formulate a response while Kale was inspecting the salve with a practiced eye. The boy was rather mysterious, having only joined their group this year by transferring from God's Nowhere, and not being very talkative. Plus, you know, he was a Morlock. How long had the boy been watching him? Sadly, he had a tendency to lose track of his surroundings when he worked on something, so he couldn't tell. It's nothing special, Zorian finally said. Now your work. That's impressive. I get the notion that you're on a whole different level from the rest of us when it comes to alchemy. Even Zack can't beat you most of the time, and he seems to be assing everything these days. The white-haired boy smiled mildly. Zack doesn't have the passion for the subject. Alchemy requires a craftsman's touch and a lot of patience, and no matter how extensive his knowledge is, Zack just doesn't have the mentality for it. You do. If you had as much practice with alchemy as Zack apparently does, you'd surpass him for sure. Ah, so you think he has prior experience, too? Zorian inquired. I do not know him as well as yourself and the rest of your peers, having only recently joined your group. Still, one does not get as proficient in this field as Zack apparently is in a matter of months. He works with the practiced ease of someone who has been doing alchemy for years. Like you, tried Zorian. Like me, Kale confirmed. I hate to be rude, but are you finished here? I'd like to make something myself today. Zorian apologized to the boy for the hold-up, which the Morlock waved off as something of little importance, and bid him goodbye. As he walked away, it occurred to Zorian that he should have probably made some kind of sleeping potion for himself while he was at it. He had to get plenty of rest tonight, because he certainly wouldn't get any tomorrow. Chapter 004 Stars Fell. I'm coming, Zorian grumbled, stomping towards the door. Really, what's with all the frantic knocking? Who exactly was so desperate to get into his room? He wrenched the door open and found himself staring at Akoya's disapproving face. Ako, what are you doing here? I should be asking you that, she said. Why are you still at home? The dance is 2 hours away, Zorian interrupted. I can get to the dance hall in 10 minutes. Honestly, Zorian, why do you always have to wait for the last possible moment to do something? Don't you realize what a bad example you're setting? Time is precious, Zorian said. And I will repeat my question, what are you doing here? I don't think it's your usual habit to seek people out when they are not early enough for your taste. Miss Zalti told me to get you, Akoya admitted. Zorian blinked. It seems Elsa wanted to make sure he didn't forget. Ha! While the idea had occurred to him, he knew that would never fly. She also said you couldn't find a date, so that will be me for the evening, Akoya continued in a more subdued tone, suddenly finding the doorframe interesting enough to merit examination. Zorian scowled. How does refuse to bring a date become couldn't find a date? It seemed that Elsa, like his mother, had a tendency to translate his words into whatever was most convenient to her purposes. The two of them would get along quite well, Zorian suspected. Anyway, get dressed so we can go already, she said, suddenly regaining her confidence. You might be alright with cutting things close, but I'm not. Zorian stared at her for a full second, trying to decide what to do. He was half tempted to slam the door in her face and refuse to participate in this farce, but he supposed it wasn't Akoya's fault that she got roped into this. In all likelihood she had more pleasant plans for the evening than accompanying a surly boy who loathed the experience. He shooed her into the room and went into the bathroom to get dressed. He really had to marvel at Ilse's manipulation skills, though, if it was just him going to this thing, he would have come dressed in casual clothes, spent the absolute minimum of time there before leaving, and avoided people like a plague throughout the entire evening. Now? He didn't want to ruin Akoya's evening, which meant he would have to make at least a token effort. Yes, Ilse and his mother would get along like two peas in a pod. The walk to the dance hall was a quiet one. Zorian refused to strike up a conversation, despite sensing that Akoya found the silence awkward. The silence suited him just fine, and he knew he would be comfortable with very few things this evening. He would enjoy the peace while it lasted. Which wasn't long. The hall that the academy set aside for this event was about 10 minutes away from his residence building. The moment they approached it, they were greeted with the sight of a large gathering in front of the entrance, full of excited students engaged in animated discussions. Zorian paled a little at the sight of the dense throng. He was getting a headache just by looking at them. Sadly, no matter how much he pleaded with Akoya, she refused to let them wait on the outskirts of the gathering until the start of the dance. As revenge, Zorian accidentally managed to get separated from Akoya when they were ushered inside and got himself lost in the crowd. He chuckled to himself, wondering how long it would take her to find him again. He'd be shocked if it was less than half an hour, since he was quite adept at avoiding the notice of a particular person at a party without drawing attention from the other party-goers. For a supposedly simple school dance, the entire event was surprisingly lavish. The tables were overflowing with food, much of it so exotic that Zorian couldn't identify it, and the hall was decorated with high-quality paintings and animated carvings that moved in a pre-programmed manner. Hell, even the tablecloths were full of complicated lace and so soft they had to have been made of something monstrously expensive. Many of his fellow students were openly gaping at their surroundings, and even Zorian, who had been at these kinds of events many times before, was a little shocked. Then he shrugged and did his best to blend into the crowd so Akoya couldn't find him. He meandered through the tables overflowing with food, occasionally sampling one of the dishes when he saw something interesting, observing the other people and painstakingly avoiding notice from anyone who might be inclined to strike up a conversation with him. He could see why Ilse was so determined to make everything about the dance run smoothly. The sheer expense of the thing aside, it wasn't just the students that were present. There were also representatives from various guilds, houses, societies, and organizations. And not just from the Alliance, but also from abroad, even other continents. He could see at least one man in the distinctive light blue Ab-Nazi military uniform, a small delegation from Hudson, and a dark-skinned woman in a garb so colorful Zorian doubted anyone failed to notice her by now. He idly wondered what this dance was really about, since these people wouldn't be here for a simple school dance. Before deciding, he didn't really care. People like this lived in their own world, and had different standards of importance from mere mortals like him. An hour later the first dance was about to start and Zorian made his way to Akoya. She was fuming, and didn't appear to believe him when he claimed he had honestly gotten lost and couldn't find her until now, but she managed to restrain herself from blowing up at him. He led her to the dance floor and didn't retaliate when she accidentally stepped on his toes a couple of times. "People were asking for you," she said finally, having tired of abusing his toes for the moment. "Well, I was around," Zorian said with a small smirk. "All they had to do was look for me. No reason why you can't seek them out now, though," Akoya remarked. "But Ako, we're dancing. There is no way I'd leave a beautiful girl like you for anything. I've left you unattended for too long as it is," Zorian said, not a trace of mocking in his voice. It was a practice skill. She glared at him, but Zorian could see she liked the compliment. Sadly, it didn't stop her from dragging him off to meet one group of people after another soon afterwards. Zorian hated being put on display like that, but he suspected Akoya was under orders from Ilse, so he didn't snap at her. He was surprised his stalling had worked for as long as it did, really. Zorian found himself memorizing various faces, names, and titles, despite not caring much. It was instinctive to him by now, and he did it even when he didn't mean to, the legacy of his family's failed attempt to turn him into a party animal. Kaczynski? Oh, are you by chance related to Damon and Fertov Kaczynski? Yes, Zorian said, doing his best to keep the annoyance out of his voice. Oh my, how fortunate, she said. I must say your brother isn't half bad with the violin. She gestured towards the stage, where the Academy Music Club was playing a slow, relatively quiet song. Fertov was officially an ordinary orchestra member, but was obviously the most prominently placed musician on the stage. His presence, as usual, attracted attention and comments. What instrument do you play? None, Zorian deadpanned. His family had tried to teach him how to play an instrument, since it was a fashionable thing to learn among the rich and those pretending to be, but were thwarted by the fact that Zorian was almost entirely tone-deaf. He had no ability to play music at all. Truth be told, he wasn't particularly interested in it either, though he could certainly feign interest when doing so was polite. It was one of his mother's bigger disappointments that he had no talent in this area, since Damon and Fertov were both relatively decent at music, Damon at playing the piano and Fertov at playing the violin. They weren't prodigies by any means, but they were skilled enough to impress the kind of people that frequented events like this. I don't have much of an ear for music, unlike my brothers. Personally, I'm more interested in how the orchestra fills the entire hall evenly with sound, with everyone hearing them at the right volume, regardless of how near or how far they are sitting in relation to the stage. Sadly, neither the woman nor anyone else gathered around them could answer that question. Apparently nobody else even noticed it until he mentioned it. In fact, Zorian got a distinct notion that people felt it was an irrelevant detail and that he was weird for even mentioning it. Bah, no appreciation for magic from these people. Why were they attending a dance at Image Academy, again? Thankfully, Akoya decided to have mercy on him at this point and led them to a nearby table to get something substantial to eat. A couple of other students from their class joined them and a casual conversation settled in around them. Zorian didn't contribute much, since he found the conversation to be mostly aimless drivel that was of no interest to him. He still nodded and chuckled at appropriate times, of course, brushing off an occasional comment about him being too quiet and needing to lighten up. He was just about to dig into the piece of cake in front of him when Akoya nudged him with her knee. He glanced at her with an unvoiced question. Wrong fork, she mumbled. Zorian looked down at the fork in his hand and realized he was supposed to use the tiny fork reserved for desserts. He shrugged and stabbed the cake with the giant fork in his hand anyway. I know, he mumbled back. That seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Zorian, she burst out, her voice carrying a pleading note in it. Why are you being so difficult? It's just one night. I know I'm not what you wanted for your date. It's not that, Zorian interrupted her. It's not like I wanted a date, anyway. I was going to come alone to this thing. She stared at him in shock. She seemed emotionally crushed, and Zorian didn't understand why. Why you'd rather go alone than with him, me? She asked. Oh crap. All this time he thought Akoya was roped into this to keep an eye on him, but what if she had wanted to go with him? That. She fled before he could figure out something to say. He swore under his breath and buried his face in his hands. This is why he hated these kind of events. Break. An hour later he was pretty sure Akoya was no longer in the dance hall and that she wasn't going to come back. He didn't really want to chase her through the streets in the middle of the night, so he refrained from following her outside. Besides, what was he supposed to say to her? He wouldn't know where to even start. He thought about going home himself, but in the end he simply climbed up onto the roof of the dance hall and observed the stars. He wasn't going to get much sleep tonight, anyway. To keep his mind occupied, he silently named all the stars and constellations he could see. Due to his interest in the topic as a child and the astronomy class they had in their first year at the academy, he knew quite a bit. It was a full hour before he ran out of things to name and describe. Monday was going to be awkward. Zorian had no doubt their little drama was overheard and would be the topic of conversation for several weeks to come. Considering that Akoya was a bit of a teacher's pet in most of the subjects, the teachers could very well decide to make his life more difficult in the days to come as well. Damn it all. It was the sound of fireworks that broke him out of his thoughts. It was midnight apparently, and the festival had officially started. Zorian relaxed a little as he watched various fireworks blossom against the night sky, each exploding in its own unique way. It was beautiful. Most of them dissolved into quickly fading motes of light after the initial explosion, but a couple of them remained whole and consistently bright, more like flares than fireworks. They arched through the sky before dipping down and falling back to Earth like falling stars. He frowned. Weird. Shouldn't they be exploding by now? The flare falling closest to him slammed into the nearby Academy residence building and detonated. The explosion was so loud and so bright that Zorian was momentarily blinded and deafened, stumbling back and collapsing to his knees as the entire building shook beneath his feet. Blinking spots out of his vision, his ears still ringing from the sound of the explosion, Zorian scrambled back to his feet. He stared at the spot where the stricken residence building once stood. Virtually the entire building had been leveled to the ground. Everything flammable in the vicinity of the impact site was burning, and strange flaming shapes were emerging from the epicenter of the destruction. Wait a minute. That's his residence building. He collapsed to his knees again as the implications of this hit him. If he had opted to stay in his room like he had originally planned, he'd have been dead right now. It was a sobering thought. But what the hell was happening here? That was no firework, that's for sure. It looked and sounded more like a high-level artillery spell. It was hard to tell if it was simply a consequence of his hearing being damaged, but he noticed the faint sounds of celebration had stopped. Looking over the city, he noticed that what happened to the residence building wasn't an isolated occurrence. Wherever one of the flares hit, it left devastation in its wake. He only had a few seconds to ponder this before he noticed another batch of flares start ascending into the sky from the distance. This particular barrage was not masked by fireworks, so it was pretty obvious that they were artillery spells. They were under attack. As the flares started dropping back to Earth, Zorian began to panic. What the hell was he supposed to do? Running away would be pointless since he didn't know what the flares were targeting. He could very well be running straight into the area of effect if he ran blindly. Wait a minute, why does he have to do anything? There are a bunch of capable mages in the building, he should just notify them and have them handle it. He rushed down into the dance hall. He had barely stepped onto the stairway when he ran into Elsa and Chiron. Zorian. What are you doing here? Elsa demanded. I just went out for some fresh air, Zorian fumbled. But that's not important right now. I agree, Chiron said. Kid, what was that blast? Don't tell me this is something you did. Hardly, Zorian said. Some kind of flares are falling all over the city, destroying everything they hit. Looks like some kind of powerful artillery spell. Elsa and Chiron shared a look between each other before turning back to him. Go join Akoya and the others in the dance hall, Elsa told. We'll see what is happening and teleport everyone into the shelters if necessary. The both pushed past him and rushed to the roof, leaving Zorian to stumble into the dance hall in a daze. Akoya. Akoya wasn't in the dance hall. She left. Because of him. She was out there, maybe even already dead. He shook his head and banished such thoughts out of his mind. He took out his divination compass and quickly cast a divination spell to locate her. He wasn't sure if it was going to work, since the spell he used could only find people you were familiar with, in other words, friends and family. Thankfully, it seemed that being classmates with her was enough of a connection for the spell to work. He took a deep breath to steel his nerves. He was liable to get himself killed, but, well, it was kind of his fault. He didn't think he could live with himself if Akoya ended up dead because of him. Like an intangible ghost, he weaved between agitated students and foreign dignitaries, ignored them unhindered, until he was near the exit. He slipped out of the building and then broke into the run in the direction indicated by the needle of his divination compass. Trolls were pretty nasty creatures. There were several subspecies, But all of them were large 3-meter-tall humanoids with tough leathery skin and supernatural regenerative abilities so strong they were able to reattach severed limbs simply by holding them to the matching stump for a few moments. The most numerous and famous subspecies was the forest troll, which had vivid green skin and roamed throughout the great forested expanse in the north. As Zorian watched a troop of trolls strut through the streets, smashing windows and howling unintelligibly, he reflected that it was fortunate the acrid smoke wafting from the nearby burning buildings masked his scent. His textbooks all said a forest troll's sense of smell was frighteningly good. Normally he would have wondered what such a large gathering of forest trolls was doing in the middle of a human city, relatively far away from their native lands, but the blades and masses they were holding told him all he needed to know. Those were weapons too advanced to have been produced by the trolls themselves, who were highly primitive and lacked such high metalworking skills. They were war trolls. Somebody armed these creatures and set them loose on the city. Once they were gone, Zorian relaxed a little and tried to figure out what to do. He was such an idiot. Why, oh why did he have to run off without getting some help from the teachers first? Then again, he assumed the flares were the only danger, in which case getting to Okoye wouldn't be an issue, assuming a stray flare didn't get him. Instead he found the city overrun with monsters. This wasn't some kind of a terrorist attack like he assumed, it was a full-blown invasion. Sadly, the option to return to the dance hall was closed to him. A lot of the invading forces were converging towards the academy, cutting off his retreat path. With that in mind, Zorian set out towards Okoye. He kept himself in the shadows, knowing the invaders would quickly notice anyone caught in the open, such as that boy standing over there. Is that Zack? Over here. Zack shouted, waving his hand in the air. I'm over here, you stupid animals. Come and get me. Zorian gaped at the reckless stupidity of what he was witnessing. What the hell was that idiot doing? No matter how talented a student he was, there was no way Zack could stand up to the sort of monstrosities that were stalking the city at the moment. But it was too late to do anything. Attracted by Zack's shouting, the trolls came running back, giving a single collective battle cry before charging at the boy foolish enough to attract their attention. Zorian could tell from Zack's posture that he intended to fight the trolls, which he thought was pretty crazy. What could he do against a creature that regenerates from virtually any wound done to it? Only fire and acid could do permanent harm, and they didn't dash. Zack grasped his staff firmly in his hand, his other hand outstretched in the direction of the charging trolls. A roaring fireball erupted from his hand and exploded right in the middle of the troll formation. When the flames cleared, only charred corpses remained. Zorian was shocked. A proper fireball like that was a third circle spell, and required a sizable amount of mana to cast, much more than any academy student had. Even Dayman could not have cast that spell when he was Zack's age. Yet not only had Zack successfully done it, he didn't even appear drained from the action. Indeed, when a flock of iron beaks attacked soon after, raining their deadly feathers at the boy, Zack simply erected an aegis, a freaking aegis, around himself and peppered the birds with tiny fireballs that hummed in on their targets, like magic missiles made out of fire. Zorian was transfixed by the sight of his classmate effortlessly fighting off hordes of monsters single-handedly. So much so that he almost failed to notice one of the winter wolves attacking Zack had stealthily broken off from the main pack and was sneaking up on him. Almost. Thankfully, some primal instinct alerted him to the danger and he threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's deadly pounce. Zorian cursed himself as he watched the winter wolf reorient itself with startling ease for something so large, ready for another pounce. He really should have expected to be targeted, considering the amount of attention Zack was drawing to himself. He should have used Zack's fighting as a distraction and fled while he had the chance. Now it was too late. Zorian knew he was not fast enough to outrun a winter wolf, and he had no combat spells with which to defend himself. Or rather, no spell rods and such. If he survived the evening, he would definitely learn a few combat invocations, obsolete as they may be. It was a big if, though. A shining bolt of force slammed into the winter wolf's head, causing it to explode in a gory mess of blood and bone fragments. Zorian didn't know whether to be disgusted that he was showered by some of the bloody mess or relieved he would live for a little while longer. He also noted that the effects of the bolt were a bit strong for a regular magic missile. He supposed this was just another example of Zack's baffling proficiency with combat magic. "Zorian? What the hell are you doing here?" Zorian looked at Zack speculatively. Noticing the trail of corpses left in the other boy's wake, Zorian eyed the staff in his right hand and the belt full of spell rods. For all his seeming recklessness, Zack certainly came prepared. He was half tempted to ask the boy the very same question, but decided that would be needlessly antagonistic. Zack did just save his life, after all. He decided to go for honesty. Maybe the other boy would be willing to help him get to Akoya, considering his inspiring fighting skills. Searching for Akoya. She left the dance a while before the attack, and it's kind of my fault. Zack groaned. Man, and I even went to the trouble of making sure you go to the dance, too. It's like you want to get killed or something. You? Asked Zorian incredulously. You're the one that told Elsa I wasn't planning to go. All this time I've blamed Benisek. How did you even know about it? You always stay in your room and get killed in the initial barrage if I don't do something to stop it. And let me tell you, convincing you not to stay in your room without resorting to violence or getting Elsa involved is a damn chore. You can really be a stubborn ass when you want to be, Zack said with a sigh. Zorian stared at him, confused. The way Zack was talking, you'd think this kind of thing happens every day or something. But enough of that, said Zack cheerfully. Let's go find Akoya before something eats her. You know the way? And so they did. They traveled through the burning streets of the city, leaving a trail of dead invaders behind them. Zack didn't even try to avoid the monsters, simply plowing through them like an angry god out for vengeance. At one point they were even attacked by a horde of skeletons in an enemy image, but Zack simply made the earth beneath their feet open up and swallow them. Zorian dutifully kept his mouth shut and never questioned Zack about his seemingly inexhaustible mana reserves or his knowledge of advanced magic that should be beyond his access level and proficiency, content to enjoy the benefits of Zack's skill and talent. He would never have come this far without Zack's help, and he was honestly grateful for the boy's assistance. Zack could keep his secrets, whatever they were. They eventually found Akoya barricaded in the upper floor of one of the houses. Apparently she was chased there by a pack of winter wolves and then refused to leave for fear that the creatures were waiting for her to come out. Smart, really. Smarter than what Zorian had done, that's for sure. Fortunately, there was no trace of winter wolves around the house at this point, not that Zack was likely to have had any trouble with them if they were present, so they moved to the slightly frustrating task of convincing Akoya that it was safe to unbarricade the door. Apparently her experience with the winter wolves had shaken her up pretty badly. Zorian was certain she would blame him for causing her to leave the safety of the dance hall, so he was quite surprised when Akoya immediately latched onto him when she finally opened the door, hugging him and sobbing into his shoulder. I thought I was going to die, she wailed. There were these huge birds flinging iron feathers everywhere and the winter wolves and... Zorian opened his mouth in confusion, unsure how to deal with such an emotional outburst. He shot Zack a pleading look, but the boy merely grinned at him cheekily, apparently amused by the reaction. Ah, young love, Zack nodded to himself knowingly. But I'm afraid you'll have to continue your heartfelt reunion back in the shelters. Yes. Akoya shouted immediately, raising her face out of Zorian's shoulder. She totally ignored Zack's jab about them being in love, though Zorian suspected it was because she hadn't even heard that part. She was still clutching his torso with an iron grip, as if afraid he'd disappear if she let go. It was kind of painful, but he refrained from telling her so. The shelters. We'll be safe there. Zack flinched back for a moment before catching himself. It was so quick Akoya didn't appear to have noticed, but Zorian did. So the shelters weren't safe either. But apparently they were still safer than where they were right now, because Zack appeared determined to go through with it. Great, said Zack cheerily, clapping his hands in satisfaction. He took one of the spell rods out of his belt and handed it to Akoya. You hold on to, Zorian. What is that? Zorian asked suspiciously. The rod had none of the markings that might identify what it was for, which made Zorian a bit leery of it. Using unknown magical objects without identifying what they're for was a big no-no if you wanted to remain healthy and alive into your old age. It's a teleport rod, Zack said. It's programmed to transport whoever is holding it to the shelters. I've set it to a 30-second delay, so hold it before you're left behind. But what about you? Akoya asked. You need to hold on to before it activates. Ah, no, Zack said, waving her off. I still have unfinished business here. Unfinished business? Akoya protested. Zack, this isn't a game. These things are going to kill you. I'm perfectly capable. Zorian wasn't sure what tipped him off, exactly. He just got a vague feeling of dread and knew he had to react immediately, much like what happened when the Winter Wolf tried to get a jump on him earlier. Wrenching himself free from Akoya's grip with a sudden jerk, he pushed Zack out of the way of the incoming spell. An angry red ray surged through the air in front of them, passing right where Zack's head was only a few moments ago, and hit the wall behind them. The jagged beam of red light bit deep into the wall, gouging a deep trench in it and shrouding the area in a cloud of fine dust. Crap, Zack said. He found me. Quick, hold the rod before Akoya winked out of existence as the rod teleported her away to safety. It activates, finished Zack in a long-suffering tone. Damn it, Zorian, why didn't you hold on? You'd be dead, then. Zorian protested. He wasn't going to let a person who helped him so much tonight die from a stray spell if he could help it. Besides, whoever had cast it would surely fall to Zack's magical might, just like the rest of the creatures and enemy mages they had encountered so far. Just how bad could this enemy caster be, really? A sudden gust of air blew the dust away and a gaunt humanoid figure stepped into view. Zorian actually gasped in surprise as he took in the appearance of the thing in front of them. It was a skeleton wreathed in sickly green light. Its bones were black with a strange metallic sheen, as if they were not bones at all, but rather a facsimile of a skeleton made out of some kind of black metal. Encased in gold-decorated armor, with a scepter held tightly in one of its skeletal hands and a crown full of purple gemstones, the creature looked like some long-dead king risen from the dead. It was a lich. It was a thrice-damned lich. Oh, they were so going to die. The lich swept its empty eye sockets over them. As Zorian's eyes met the black pits that once held the lich's eyes, an uncomfortable feeling washed over him, like the lich was peering into his very soul. After less than a second, the lich lazily shifted its attention to Zack, apparently dismissing Zorian as something of no consequence. So. The lich spoke, its voice resonant with power. You're the one that has been killing my minions. Zorian, run away while I deal with this guy, Zack said, clutching the staff in his hand. Without waiting for a response, Zack launched a barrage of magic missiles towards the lich, who retaliated with a trio of purple beams as it erected an aegis around itself with a single wave of its bony hand. Two of them were aimed at Zack, but sadly enough the lich saw fit to aim one towards Zorian's retreating form. While it failed to hit Zorian directly, the beam's impact with the nearby ground created a sizable explosion that drove stone shrapnel into his legs. The pain was immense, and Zorian collapsed on the ground in an instant, unable to take a single step further. Over the next 5 minutes, Zorian painfully dragged himself behind a nearby cart, hoping that it would shield him from at least some of the destructive power that was being thrown around in the battle. Zack was keeping the lich occupied enough that it didn't send any more spells after Zorian, which was fortunate because Zorian was no longer in any state to evade them. He watched with growing unease as Zack and the lich exchanged various destructive spells that Zorian couldn't even identify, realizing with rising dread that his prediction of their grisly death was well-founded. No matter how good Zack was, he was not even in the same league as the lich. The thing was toying with the other boy, and was bound to tire of the game sooner or... He winced as a spear-like red bolt punched straight through Zack's aegis and impaled the boy through his flank. He suspected the hit was in an unvital spot only because the lich wished to gloat a little more, and his suspicions were all but confirmed when the creature didn't finish Zack off with anything destructive, opting instead to hurl Zack into the air with a single casual gesture. Zack collided with the wall near where Zorian was taking cover, and groaned in pain. Apparently not in any sort of hurry, the Lich approached slowly. It seemed unconcerned that Zack was rising shakily to his feet, a spell rod clenched tightly in his left hand. Zorian could see that his right hand was pressed tightly against the bleeding wound on his flank. "You put up quite a fight, child," the Lich said. "Impressive for someone who is supposed to be a mere academy student." "Not impressive enough," Zack gasped out, the spell rod dropping from his hand as he clutched the wound on his flank with both hands, apparently in great pain. "I guess I'll have to try harder next time." The Lich chuckled. It was strange sound, hardly fitting the creature. "Next time? Silly child, there will be no next time. There is no way I'm letting you live, surely you know that?" "Bah," Zack spat, straightening himself with a grimace. "Enough talking, just get it over with." "You seem surprisingly unconcerned considering you're about to die," the Lich remarked conversationally. "Ah, whatever," said Zack, rolling his eyes. "It's not like I'll be dead for good." Zorian looked at Zack incredulously, not really understanding what Zack was getting at. The Lich seemed to understand, though. "Ah, I see," the Lich said. "You must be new to soul magic if you think this makes you invulnerable. I could just trap your soul in a soul jar, but I have a much better idea." The Lich casually gestured towards Zorian, and he suddenly felt his entire body freeze up as if it was encased in some alien force. Another wave and Zorian was hurled with great speed towards the shocked Zack, where he painfully slammed into the other boy. They both ended up on the ground in a tangle of limbs, and Zorian was relieved that at least the unknown force paralyzing him was gone. "It doesn't matter if your soul can be reincarnated elsewhere if someone mutilates it beyond recognition before it gets there," the Lich said. "After all, the soul may be immortal, but no one said it cannot be altered or added to." Dimly, Zorian could hear the Lich chanting in some strange language that definitely wasn't standard Ecosian used in traditional invocations, but any curiosity about this was washed away by a wave of pain and unidentifiable wrongness that suddenly slammed into him. He opened his mouth to scream, but then his world suddenly erupted into bright light before suddenly going completely black. Tobe continued. Thanks for listening.